to remove emotion and just think about the decision logically. I call it the 4-pillar framework. And so I said, what are the things that matter to me the most in my career? And there were 4 things: learning, earning, network, and story. And so learning was, how much am I going to learn working with acquisition versus staying on my current path? Earning was, how much am I going to make at acquisition? And more importantly, how much is this going to increase my capacity to earn in the future? Network was, who am I going to meet at the company, my coworkers, and also who am I going to meet because of the company, the people who come in the doors.
Yeah.
And then story was, how much is this opportunity going to open up future opportunities? And so I weighed both paths across these 4 categories out of 10, and I added them all up together, and acquisition outcome won.
Our guest today is Jay Yang. Jay is a writer and marketing strategist. At 19, he became an Amazon best-selling author with his first book, You Can Just Do Things. Before that, he cold emailed his way to a role at Beehive at 16, spent 50 hours building a pitch deck that made him Noah Kagan's head of content at 17, built a 6-figure ghostwriting agency at 18 while in school, and at 19 dropped out of college to join Alex Hormozi at acquisition.com, where he helped launch the book that set a Guinness World Record. Now he's 20 and he's just about to launch his next book, Work with the Best. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rohan. What an intro. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, what a start your career. I think a great place to start would be maybe talk about the reception you've gotten around your first book. What were you expecting? What came in like totally unexpected? And why did you write this follow-up, Work with the Best?
Yeah, well, I get asked a lot, why did I write You Can Just Do Things? And the honest answer is I wrote it because I couldn't not write it. It was the topic and the concept was something that I would constantly be thinking about first thing I wake up, when I was going to bed, going to sleep. And so I always knew that I wanted to write a book about this permissionless approach, this idea that you don't need permission to create the career or live the life that you want to live. And originally it was for some of my college friends because I had a bunch of them apply to all these internships and not hear back. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. And, for my own career, I've kind of designed it by using cold emails and cold outreach approaches. And so I wanted to share that with them. The most surprising thing has been, not only has it reached young people, but it's also reached kind of the older crowd as well. And one example that comes to mind, I had this 64-year-old lady DM me on Instagram saying, your motto, you can just do things, inspired me to sign up for this bodybuilding competition. And I won first place. And it just blew my mind. Like, that was totally not the intention of the book at all.
Yeah.
But I realized it's a message and a motto that I think a lot of people can benefit from.
I like that. And I'm 40 years old. And I think the message is, I would say, even more true and important for people who are like later on in their careers, because they've developed these habits and these almost like these rails and these tracks of thinking where they need to follow a certain career track or certain career ladder. And the fact that, it's really up to them to create the level of freedom and the life that they want it doesn't stop at any age, right? And so as people's thinking might get more boxed in naturally as they get older, I think this is such an important message and a story for people to read, especially now where we have the tools and the technology to build things. It's never really been, easier as it is now. And so, you've accomplished in a few years what takes the regular person, even the ambitious like founder or CEO, a decade or so, right? You're about to publish your second book. You've worked with these world-class business owners. So I want to spend some time talking about, the meta skill of leveling up and getting to work with these people. So talk a bit about the strategies that you have picked up being in these rooms around how you level up fast, and some specifics would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's funny, like I never really thought about leveling up until recently. It was always the product of just being obsessed with what I was doing. I started writing online back in 2021, and I used to tweet 10 times a day. It would be throughout school, I'd be walking in the hallways and I'd put my hand on the shoulder of like my friend and he would guide me through the hallways while I was looking down, tweeting.
Yeah.
Because I just loved it so much. And it's kind of weird that now it's kind of a popular thing to be, in marketing, to be GTM kind of
Yeah.
engineer. Now it's like a popular thing, but it really wasn't like an intentional, like I want to level up as quickly as possible. But throughout growing online, growing my writing and my audience, I think a few things. Number one, creating a group chat for everything that I do. And it sounds so trite, like, oh, just create a group chat. But for every single skill that I've done, whether it's growing on Twitter or learning copywriting or even running a marathon, I've created a group chat of people who have similar goals so that we can all keep each other accountable and share learnings. And so we can all level up more quickly.
Okay. Can you share, I'd be curious to know, being in the room, like working at acquisition.com, like I know that's got to be a room of just, high level operators, and the velocity of doing work and just shipping things has got to be there. So were there any sort of like ways that you have shifted the way you operate and the way you communicate with others that you took from Hormozis and also just like the leadership team there that you saw was effective that you started to apply in your own life?
Yeah, I'll kind of zoom out. So I was 19 at the time and I was in college. I was running a ghostwriting agency, doing well. Like I liked that I had not work-life balance, but this harmony of I got to work really hard in the mornings, and then afternoons I could, play pickup basketball with my friends, and then evenings I could kind of chill, go out, have group dinners, whatever.
Yeah.
Be a college kid. And so when I got this opportunity to work at Acquisition, I was initially hesitant. I looked up to Alex and Layla for a long time. I used to watch Alex's videos in high school. And funny enough, like I remember I would sit in the back of the class and I would tilt my head slightly so my teacher couldn't see the AirPod in my ear as I listened to his videos. So I really looked up to them, but I also felt FOMO leaving college. And so I created this framework to remove emotion and just think about the decision logically. I call it the 4-pillar framework. And so I said, what are the things that mattered to me the most in my career? And there were 4 things: learning, earning, network, and story. And so learning was, how much am I going to learn working with Acquisition versus staying on my current path? Earning was, how much am I going to make at Acquisition? And more importantly, how much is this going to increase my capacity to earn in the future? Network was, who am I going to meet at the company, my coworkers, and also who am I going to meet because of the company, the people who come in the doors?
Yeah.
And then story was, how much is this opportunity going to open up future opportunities? And so I weighed both paths across these 4 categories out of 10, and I added them all up together, and Acquisition.com won. And so that's why I chose to drop out and join Acquisition.
Yeah.
And then at Acquisition, I think the biggest thing I learned was, as funny as it sounds, it's very similar to You Can Just Do Things, which is you can do more than you think.
Yeah.
And the example I'll give isn't even related to business or content or writing in general. It's from fitness. I stayed at Acquisition for about a year, and I gained 15 pounds of muscle while I was there, simply because every morning I would wake up and I would join 3 other people who were all stronger than me, and we would do a full body workout, 6 sets of each body part to failure every single day. And it just completely reset my standard, reset my baseline for what like good looks like, what volume looks like. I used to do 3 workouts a week, maybe 3 sets, kind of just go through the motions, do 10 reps. But like working out with Alex and some of the other guys, like it completely shifted my belief of like what excellence looks like. And so I've kind of carried that same belief to some of the stuff I do now in my writing and in my content. I'm like, why would I post once a day when I can post 3 times a day, right? How can I architect a system so I can do that consistently? And so it just completely reframed my mindset on volume and excellence.
And at what point do you feel like, as you're doing that 4-pillar math, did you realize that it was time to move on? Was there a particular opportunity, or what was that kind of decision-based framework that you applied to know when it's ready to move on?
Yeah, so I mean, I always knew that everyone there knows that they're entrepreneurial, and so we kind of see it more of as a tour of duty than something that we're going to stay forever. And so it's like you go for a few years, you work as hard as you can, harder than you've ever worked, and you learn more than you've ever learned. And then when learning declines, you move on. And so I told my friend this before I joined, like, hey, probably not going to stay forever. Going to go in, be a sponge, help as much as possible, and then leave. Yeah. And he's like, okay, well, how will you know that you're stopping, learning has declined? Yeah. And I said, oh, I don't know. I'll just know. And he's like, no, you won't. Like, you'll be too emotional. Like, you won't know. Like, you'll always think that, there's something else. And so I said, okay, I will quantify it. And so I came up with this idea of I have this running doc, hundreds of pages of everything that I've learned at acquisition. And I said, the hard rule is if I don't add to this document at least once a week, then I know that learning has declined and it's time to do something new.
Yep.
And so it gave me this hard rule to be like, okay, it's not an emotional thing. It's just a logical thing.
Yeah, really interesting. And then with the book itself, what made you think that publishing the book was the right move versus just publishing, like a lot of these well-known people on Twitter do, right? Just and I guess eventually they end up writing a book. But was there something you gained at ACQ in helping to launch like money models where you realized, oh, it's actually maybe easier than I thought? Or what is your strategy to publish? It sounds like it's almost like it's more painful to hold it in you than to get it out of you. But are there any other thoughts around or kind of like learnings you had where maybe it's easier than I thought book publishing was?
So I published my first book before I joined acquisition, actually 2 weeks before I joined. And so I wanted to write the first book because I worked with Noah Kagan on launching his book, $1 Million Weekend. And I also worked with a few other authors after that. Man, I love reading books. I'm a book reader. And so I've always been curious about like the process of what it takes to craft this magical thing.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, why don't I try it? Like, why don't I take a stab and see if I can demystify this process? And the reason why I'm writing a second book is because after writing the first book, it was both easier than I thought and both harder than I thought, but more fun than I thought, which is why I wanted to do it again.
Yeah, really interesting. So now, like, talk about, there's so many people in the audience that want to get in front of a busy person. And I think you're one of the best people to do it, given how early, you are in your career. So I know you've got a framework, but I'd be curious to know, how do you even select the people that you choose to work with, right? I know it was Tyler Denk, then Noah Kagan, then ACQ is inbound, but you might have other people that you've reached out to where you feel like you can provide like unique value add to them. So how do you decide who you choose to work with? And then maybe talk a bit about the framework you might use to make it an irresistible offer for them.
So the number one question I give people to reflect on before working for someone is, what do you want? And so chapter 1 in my next book, Work with the Best, is define your North Star, because it's really hard to get what you want if you don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your goal is to work with someone, my question to you is like, why? What are you trying to, like, what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And so when you know like where you're trying to go, you can then reverse engineer the skills needed to get to that goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, what outcome do I want? What do I need to do to get that outcome? And what do I need to learn to get that outcome? And then who is the best at teaching that skill? And so, for example, before working for Beehive, I was 15, and I tried a bunch of different projects. I tried a YouTube channel, Instagram theme pages, a newsletter, a clothing brand, and all of them didn't do well. And so I was like, man, I'm working hard, but I'm not getting the outcome that I want. Therefore, I actually probably don't know what working means, right? I'm doing all this like fluffy extra stuff that isn't working. And so I said, well, if I work for a startup, will that increase the likelihood that I learn how to actually ship a product and put something live and make it real? Probably. And so then I worked with Beehive. And then I said, okay, I know how to ship something now, but I don't know how to market it. Well, who's the best marketer I know? Oh, Noah Kagan. And so, okay, let's try and learn from Noah Kagan. And then I started my agency. I was running the business, and I said, man, my business capped at this ceiling. I don't know how to get it to past this ceiling. And of course, I can always pay a consultant or take a course, but I was at a point in my career where it was easier to shut the business down and join acquisition, whereas if I kept going, it'd be harder to do that.
Yeah.
And so it was easier to switch paths. And so I said, okay, well, who's the best at scaling these type of businesses? Well, Alex. And so then I tried to learn business and operations and scaling. And so for each step, it's what outcome am I trying to get? And is this helping me learn the skill required to level up?
Yeah, okay. So double click on your North Star filter. Like, what do you want, when you hit certain like milestones in your life? Because I think that'd be helpful and illustrative for people of all ages to think about how to think about their own North Star. So can you walk through your own North Star and like what that looks like for you?
So my North Star, if I gave you the full answer, would be like several pages of things. And I think the idea is to get as specific as possible. I think most people don't ask themselves, like, do you want to work inside or outside? Do you want to work with your hands? Do you want to work on a computer? Do you want to work by yourself? Do you want to work with other people? Where do you want to live? Do you want to live on the beach? in the mountains? Like, do you want to live with people? Do you want to live in a cul-de-sac? How many cars do you want? Do you want a car? Do you want to live in an apartment? Like, get as specific as possible about everything.
Yeah.
Because it's the act of reflection is taking agency over your life. And so that's step one. And so my condensed version of that is a play off of Naval's quote, which is a fit body, a calm mind, a house full of love, meaningful work, and enough wealth to not have to worry about it. And if I can do those 5 things, then I will have gotten to my North Star. And it's intentionally vague and amorphous just because you can't ever really achieve those things. You just get better at those things. And so that's how I filter through all of my decisions now. Because the 2 questions I love to ask is, what do I want? And what inputs will increase the likelihood I get the output that I want? And so if I know that that's my North Star, then I can filter every single decision through that lens of like, does waking up early and working out increase the likelihood I get the outcome that I want? Well, probably more than sleeping in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Does starting a business and trying to make money, does that increase? Yes. Okay. Does working with someone who's ahead of me and learning from them increase the likelihood I get what I want? Yes. Okay. And so does creating content and getting out there and lowering CAC and increasing the likelihood people want to work with me increase the likelihood I get what I want? Yes. Okay. So let's do that. And so that's allowed me to kind of make decisions.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. So I want to now like spend some time on how you are growing like on X and on LinkedIn, because many of the folks tuning in, they want specifics and want to know how to do that. You do a really good job of that for yourself, but also, some of the creators that you work with. So I know you shared something when we spoke initially, which is show people what they need to see to get them to act. And so what are some examples of that or specific writing you have found to be effective to get people to take action?
So I assume that if you're listening to this podcast, you probably want to use content to grow your business, right? You're not trying to do this because you want to be an influencer or you want to be famous, right? You're trying to grow your business. And so if we know that that is the outcome, that is the mini North Star for this example, then what inputs would increase the likelihood you get there? Okay, well, if you run let's say a LinkedIn content agency, and you want to sign clients, you want to sign founders or executives who want to work with you, then what do they need to see to trust you to want to work with you? Okay, then you can start to reverse engineer into content buckets. Well, you probably need to show that you have what they want. You probably should have a decent sized LinkedIn as well, right? A LinkedIn that is professional, a LinkedIn that attracts leads, a LinkedIn that, attracts attention and gets engagement. Okay, so you probably should show that. Well, you also probably need to show that you have proof. Not only have you done it for yourself, you've done it for others. So you need trust. And then it's like, okay, well, people like to work with people that they like and that they admire. And so, okay, we probably also need to show some personality, show a little bit about our life so that they know who I am as a person. And so you can see how you can start to create content buckets based on reverse engineering your way from what the outcome is.
Yeah.
And so that's how I start to think about creating a plan for a client or for someone who wants to grow on LinkedIn or X is, what do you want? And then how can we show those things to make it, to increase the likelihood you get the outcome that you want?
Are there any, there are a few different frameworks where like think of a certain emotion that you want to invoke, whether it's like, wow, OMG, like, I can't believe they said this, like just have the emotion in mind and pin that to what you want to provoke as part of the content. It's also, if I were to do this, like, here's how I would get started over the next like 30, 60, 90 days. Are there any, and then of course, like proof points and these sort of things. Actually, let me rephrase the question. So a lot of people tuning in, they're using AI in their writing process. And oftentimes what I see as a content agency owner, when I get on sales calls, is you have people that are like, why can't I just outsource this to Claude or to my AI to help me just write for me? And invariably they come back when they realize that it writes in a way that is so generalized and they're outsourcing their thinking. They're not effectively just like extracting their operator level approach and thinking. And when that gets smoothed down too much by AI, no matter how good your raw assets are, if it's not extracting like almost a stream of consciousness way in which you speak and talk, there is something that is lost. So as someone who, continues to just publish so much volume of writing, how do you think about a founder's voice or anyone's voice in an era where AI allows you to, write as easily as possible?
Well, fundamentally, I don't think there's anything wrong with AI. I think it's usually a skill issue with prompting. because there's two sides of the coin there. Is like, okay, you want to use your insights because you are the expert. If you outsource your thoughts into AI, if you say, hey, come up with 10 ideas for me, then you're going to get what it's trained on, which is the data of everyone else. So you're going to immediately saturate yourself to being average.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the inputs are average, then the outputs will be average, right? So that's number one. Number two is, not only do you need to have your expert insights, but you also need to have platform context. And so if you use AI to write and you don't really give it any good directions, then it's going to write like everyone else, which then again is average. And so AI is great for going from 0 to 1. It's horrible from going from 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And so it's good for being good. It sucks for being great. And so you can put out generic content, but then the question becomes, does that type of content attract the type of people you want for your business? Does putting out generic, average looking content attract your ICP? Will they see that content and be like, man, that's a beautiful piece of content, I should work with them? Or man, that looks like AI slop, I don't know if I want to work with them, because if they can't even do this right, how can I trust them with a bigger problem?
Yeah, and so when you think about your own content, what does your process look like?
To zoom out, what we want to do with content is we want to influence people, right? Influence is your ability to affect change on other people's lives, right? So if I say something and you do it, I have positive influence over you, right? And so if I say something and you don't do it, or you do the opposite, I have negative influence. And so if we want to be more influential, I think it comes down to 3 pillars. And I call this the PTL framework. So P stands for power, T stands for trust, L stands for likeness. And so power is this. Power is when you show that you have what other people want. Power is relative. A quick example would be, if you're in a bar, a bartender has a lot of power because they control the flow of drinks. Once the bartender steps out of the bar, they have no power over you. They're just an everyday person. And so this is why you see in content, like with Alex Hormozy, for example, why he starts every single video with, hi, my name is Alex Hormozy. I own acquisition.com, which last year did over $250 million a year in aggregate revenue. He states with what he did, which is power. It's credibility. I have what you want, right? This is why people make videos in front of Porsches and mansions and, stuff like that. As cliche as it sounds, like, it works. The second is T, trust. Trust is belief with evidence. If you believe without evidence, that is called faith. And so if you want trust, you need to show evidence that you know what you're talking about. An example would be Martha Stewart, right? Martha Stewart has a lot of trust with her audience because for years, all she has done is given recipes, literally step-by-step directions on how to get a good result. And so if I tell you to do something and you do it and you get a good result, the likelihood that you comply with the next thing I tell you to do is higher. And so this is why educational content, especially on LinkedIn and X, is super powerful. Because if you share a tip and someone uses it, then when you say, hey, buy my stuff or work with me, the likelihood they do that is higher. And so that's trust. The third is likeness, which is how much are you like your avatar? And likeness comes in 2 different ways, internal and external. Internal is your beliefs and your values. What do you like? Do you share the same beliefs and values as the people in your in-group? And then external is, do you look like them, right? Kind of simple. And so this is why when you use AI to write your content, you may not be writing like your avatar, right? If you write to young women in their 20s who don't even use LinkedIn, then maybe you want to use lowercase or all caps or emojis. If you write to a more professional audience, maybe you want to do the complete opposite of that. And so you have to tailor your writing style to your audience. And so if you can do those 3 things, if you can demonstrate power, trust, and likeness in your content, you have a higher likelihood of influencing people, influencing your avatar. And so this is how I fundamentally think about writing online and building a brand in general. Is, am I demonstrating that I have what others want? Am I giving them directions to get positive results? And am I showing that I'm like them, that I'm in their in-group? And if you can do those 3 things, you have influence.
I like that. I think that's really well said. And I think it's also good to understand the purpose of the different channels that we publish on, right? I know you mentioned this idea of current demand and future demand. And when people are selling their products and services, they overinvest in current demand, right? Whether it's paid ads or retargeting. And because it's sort of this pay-to-play model, there's sort of like instant gratification where there's a direct response sort of feedback loop that's in place. But it's also important to know that's only like 5% of your current audience is in that buying now pocket, and 95% are either not even aware of the problem, or they are aware of the problem but not aware of the solution. They're in that like evaluation stage. And I think it's great that you're publishing on a lot of these like social channels where you're able to reach many more people, and oftentimes I think more relevant to a business owner where maybe they have less differentiation. So maybe they are a RevOps consulting firm or a recruiter, where as a service-based business owner, they are the product. And by creating more mind share and influence, applying this principle earlier on, they're able to meet people and get people to know, like, and trust them earlier on in the buying journey. One, to accelerate that decision to wanting to choose to work with them, but then ultimately create almost like a very strong preference for them versus another. So yeah, maybe just talk a bit about how could someone who is a service-based business owner think about anything to add to that, to a service-based business owner who might be spending a lot on one-to-one outreach, or maybe this just capturing current demand and not really thinking about what that future demand is and how to speak to it.
Yeah, I think the idea that there's two types of demand is a fairly obvious idea, but I think it's important to talk about because it's so easy to only think about current demand, capturing current demand, because you can track it, right? It's direct response. You can immediately see, if I send this cold outreach, what's my conversion rate on the outreach message? What's my conversion rate on the sales call? You can track these things.
Right.
But with something like future demand, which is more brand and content, social media, it's harder to track that. It's like if someone sees your post now and then they book a call 60 days from now from an outreach message, was it the outreach message or was it the fact that they saw you and know you from your content, right? It's harder to track. But I think it's important because I guess a good example would be if I asked you, hey, what's the likelihood you buy a new iPhone in the next 2 weeks?
Unlikely. Yeah, very low.
Probably pretty low. But I've said, hey, what's the likelihood you buy an iPhone in the next 10 years?
Yeah, highly likely.
Highly likely. And so the goal of my content isn't just to capture your current demand. It's not just to right hook you right now. It's to increase your affinity so that when you get into the buying window, you think of me first. And so this is why content is amazing, is because people always say it's like, oh, social media versus paid ads, right? Organic versus paid. But it's actually both. Organic expands the circle and paid ads expands the mini circle within that circle. And so paid ads is where you right hook, but social is where you actually reach more people. And so one of the frameworks I have for social media in general is like, there's a difference between reach and resonance. And so at acquisition.com, we used to do these skits with Layla Hormozi, where we would do these like workplace skits, employee skits, very funny, has nothing to do with business, and they would go viral. They'd reach millions of views. On the outside, you're like, how does that actually drive business? That has nothing to do with business owners. You're not educating anyone. Like, what was the point of that?
Yeah.
You know, it should be empty views. But it actually expanded the amount of people who knew who Hey Layla was. Business owners would send it to friends would send it to whatever. And so people just started to follow Layla. And then over time, we had resonance content. We had content about leadership, content about culture, content about business. And so people who were maybe business owners who came for the skit reel actually was like, oh, you know what? Layla can actually solve some of my leadership issues. Like I want to work with Layla. And so it wasn't reach versus resonance. It was both. It's just two parts of the funnel. Just one, reach was for top of funnel and resonance was for bottom of funnel.
Yeah, I like that. I know you have another, again, we're covering a lot of frameworks here, but you have this idea of like the 5 C's that you apply to your writing that would pass this like litmus test around, is this good enough to send to a friend? So can you kind of walk through how you're thinking about that?
Yes. So the 5 C's are something that I'm kind of toying around with. I think I may narrow it down because 5 C's is kind of hard to remember, but I'll just run through a few. Number 1 is concise. And so one of the things we've learned in school is like, oh, you should write in 5-paragraph essays. You should use long, big words, long sentences, sound smart, right? But that's because a teacher is paid to read your writing. In the real world, no one is paid to read your stuff. You either get their attention in under 5 seconds or you lose it forever. And so the fewer words you have, the fewer confusion it is, and the easier it is to capture attention. So the first C is concision, concise. And so the question for you would be, if every word costs $10, how would you write? And so I think that's a useful frame when writing on social media. The second C is concrete. And so this is about specificity. And so if I say like meditation is great, it's not going to do well on social media. It's an obvious sentence written in an obvious way. Everyone knows it, didn't evoke any emotion, didn't stir up anything. Meditation is simple. If I said, hey, I used to suffer with ADHD until I tried this one meditation practice and now I feel calm. probably more interested, right? Because it's concrete. You've used a specific example. And so this is also why AI sucks, is because if you don't give it enough context, it'll just make stuff up on your behalf.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of your content will just drown out in the sea of noise. Like it's not memorable. The third C is conversational. And so this is specifically for social media, but I wouldn't say it's a hard rule. The best writing to me reads like I'm reading a letter to a friend or a text message to a friend. If it's overly corporate or overly professional, I think number one, people don't read it. And number two, I don't think it actually converts as well, especially if you're B2C or even B2B, I think. And so conversational, I like to write my LinkedIn posts sometimes in iMessage and then copy paste it over to LinkedIn because it just feels like I'm writing to a friend.
Yeah.
And so it gets this conversational style. And people actually comment on it, underneath the post, like, Jay's the most real, raw account on this LinkedIn, which is, maybe true, maybe not, but I think people appreciate that. The fourth C is cadence. And so one thing that AI does really poorly is it is repetitive. And so you'll see like these sentences that all sound the same because they have the same syllable count in each sentence, and it just reads very monotonously. And so the trick to get over that is read your writing out loud before you publish. And if you read it out loud and it sounds boring or it sounds repetitive and it sounds monotonous, then you probably should edit so it sounds better.
Yeah.
And so a long-winded way of saying, I think the number one North Star question for this is this so good you'd send it to a friend? And I think then that hits, is it valuable enough? Is it interesting enough? And is it easy enough to read? And so that's the question I would ask before you publish.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it made me also just think of context and how important context is before necessarily like the content that you're presenting, because again, in a world of AI, like the how-to content is becoming less and less valuable. It's more like, how are you passing it through your lived experience and sharing your lived experience before you get into whatever nugget of information you're sharing. So, I mean, with the Alex Hormozi case, it's like, what is his proof points? What is his context? And yeah, so that's something that I also really, focus on, which is how can you share this in a way where you're the only person who can tell this story? So yeah, Jay, as we start to wrap it up here, what is a message you might have for our audience that maybe you haven't shared yet? And if there are any other golden nuggets or information about the second book that you want to share, you get ready to promote it, I would want to give you the floor to do that.
Yeah, I'll give you kind of the quick pitch on the book, and whether you buy it or not does not materially affect my life. I just think it's valuable. The book is called Work with the Best, and the subtitle is How to Get the Life You Want by Helping Those Who Have It. And it's really about two things. I think number one, it's a sequel to You Can Just Do Things. The number one question people ask after You Can Just Do Things is, how do you just do things? And so it's a lot of what the book is about is what I go over, the contact quadrant, which is the 4 ways to reach out to people. And so this is good for signing clients, getting jobs, reaching out to anyone you admire. Fundamentally, there's only 2 ways you can reach out to people, one-to-one or one-to-many. Yeah. And there's only 2 types of people you know and people you don't. So friendlies and strangers. And so in the book, I walk through how to cold email someone, how to ask for a referral, how to create content, how to create a public pitch. And so that part of the book, I think, is something that I've never really talked about publicly that has helped me get all of the opportunities that we started this podcast with. And so, yeah, long-winded way to say this book is the culmination of the last 5 years of my life. It is my cookbook for creating opportunities, and hopefully it's useful to people.
I love it. Well, you are living proof that this works. Like the fact that you've accomplished all that you have accomplished at your age. Again, like I think like, the MFM guys, they talk about, if I can invest in someone's stock, like who would it be? And, investing in like Jay Yang stock is definitely like a bet investment that I would make. So yeah, thanks again for joining. Again, very like insight dense conversation. I love how clearly you think, and also what your vision is also very clear, right? Around like what you're looking to accomplish and really being clear on how to get there. So Jay, thanks again for joining the show.
Thanks, man.